Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, or good day. This will be an introduction, no, of enterprise architecture, no, and I'll just want to reiterate everyone that a number of methodologies, no, for implementing enterprise architecture had been proposed in the literature, no. Understanding methodologies, strengths and weaknesses plays significant role in selecting appropriate methodology for each enterprise architecture project. No, so this discussion, of course, must review the 5 enterprise architecture implementations methodologies, including the AAP. TUGAP is also important. DUDAP, Gartner, and FEA, and some other tools, no, in enterprise architecture. It compare also based on design framework. So comparison network or comparison framework rather is the design based on concepts, no, modeling, and process criteria. And this comparison provides vast information about selected methodologies based on a defined criteria. So we need to accept the fact that business and information technology integration is essential for enterprise. No, of course, again, the integration of essential for enterprise to achieve their competitiveness. No? Enterprise architecture is a structure of alignment, no, business and IT within enterprise. And the key responsibility of EA or enterprise architecture is to provide appropriate information systems based on enterprise business demands. So for the first time, EA was introduced by John Sackman in 1987 actually. So the purpose of the founder of EA was to use architecture like civil, no, inside of enterprises to reduce complexity of developing IS, no, or information systems. At the first, he presented the framework to create a skeleton for this purpose. So meron tayong tinatawag na Sackman framework, contains abstraction and perspective. So to give us more details about the topic, let us all welcome our first presenter for this afternoon. Go ahead, Miss Beautiful.
Hello everyone, my name is Beverly Bravo and today I'll be discussing Enterprise Architecture Concepts Review. So here are the things that I'm going to be covering today. So just to give you an overview, definition of terms, importance of enterprise architecture, domains of EA, elements of EA in different perspectives. So let's start. First, let's define EA. So as you know, enterprise architecture is composed of 2 words. So let's break them down first. First, let's define enterprise. So when we say enterprise, it pertains to the organization or sub-activity whose boundary is defined by commonly held goals, processes, and resources. So it means the structure itself or the organization itself. Next, on the other hand, architecture, I got this from a dictionary. So the complex or carefully designed structure or structure of something. So it means it may be a blueprint, the document that where you can see the design or the overview of a thing or a structure. So putting those 2 words together will have enterprise architecture. So in terms of IT and business, enterprise architecture is defined as the analysis and documentation of an enterprise in its current and future views from an integrated strategy, business, and technology perspective. So we'll know about more about this by defining um, enterprise architecture into 2 ways. So we can define EA in terms of being a noun and being a verb. So as a noun, the architecture of an enterprise is a noun. So it's a thing, it's a collection of models and information. On the other hand, when we define or we look at EA as a verb, you could say that it is an activity that is performed using a standardized process that is sustained through an ongoing management program. So yeah, that is EA. So what's the important of EA? So let's put it this way. So let's say you have like a house, you have your own house for over 5 years now. So if there will be two things that I really love to do, it's eating and it's binge watching my favorite series on Netflix. So let's say I have a house that's been with me since, or that I've been living in since 2017. And it so happened that this beautiful house, I want to have some renovations. I want to install this beautiful kitchen, and I also want to install a cozy entertainment room. So before I do that, I have to first see the whole picture. So if this house is as big as in the picture, so I have to have like an overview or a blueprint of the layout of the house before I can say if this kitchen would work, or if it's practical, or if this entertainment room could fit into my house, given that I already have existing rooms, or perhaps I can just renovate or improve a certain room, or I can just transform a certain room. So for me to do that, I have to have a blueprint of the house. So that relates to EA. So before we install improvements or implement improvements onto our company, we have to see the bigger picture. How that specific improvement, or how that specific tool, equipment, or anything that we want to install or want to implement into our company will affect the overall operations of the company. So this is why EA is very important. So it's a document that will tell us the current situation or the current state of the company in a strategic way. So that's the importance of EA. So EA has four domains. So let's take a look at them. Okay. So EA has four domains. It has on the top the business, followed by application, followed by information, and followed by technology. So let's define each of them. First, business. So it's the top of the pyramid. So it's the organizational structure. It pertains to the business relationships, also the business functions, the goal of the business, and the overall strategies of the organization. So that's the business domain of EA. Next is the application. So the application, the interactions and relationships, business capabilities, or services. So all of that. Next is the information. This mainly pertains to the data, the data center structure, management of data resources, and data analytics. And lastly, we have the technology. So basically, in a nutshell, technology is all the software and the hardware we use in EA. So in implementing the functions of the company, or the um, data workflow, or any other aspects of the enterprise architecture. So all the software and the hardware. So yeah. So those are the four domains of EA. So next is the six elements of EA. So we have governance, we have methodologies, we have best practices, framework, artifacts, and repository. So let's look how all of these elements fit together. Okay. So let's start with governance. So basically, governance is the overseeing element of the EA. So, planning, decision making, and oversight processes, and groups that will determine how the EA is developed and maintained. So basically, it's the omniscient part of the enterprise architecture. Next is the method or the methodologies. So methodologies, it's the specific steps to establish and maintain an EA program via the selected approach. So later we'll see about the approach thing. But methodologies is basically how are we going to implement the enterprise architecture, or how does all of the factors or all of the aspects there fit together. So that's where methodologies will fit. Next is the framework. So basically, we have the overseeing factor, we have the steps. Now we have to have scope. This is very important in enterprise architecture. It's the scope of the overall architecture and the type and relationship of the various sub architecture levels and threads. So that's basically the framework. It's like the template of the enterprise architecture. Next are Next is the artifacts. So when we say artifacts, it's the types and methods of documentation to be used in each sub-architecture area, including strategic analysis, business plans, internal controls, security controls, and models of workflow, databases, systems, and networks. So that's basically all the things that we need, um, all the tangible things that we need in an enterprise architecture. So next is the standards. So when we say standards, it's business and technology standards for the enterprise in each domain and segment and component of the EA. So this is basically all the policies, all the standards in each domain, whether it's a local standard, an industry standard, or the enterprise standard itself. So um, an enterprise architecture has to have standards in each domain. So when it comes to business, when it comes to the applications we use in the EA, when it comes to the data or the databases, we have to have standards, and of course the technology. So yeah, those are standards. And finally, the associated best practices. It's ways to implement parts of the overall architecture or sub-architecture in context of the overall arching EA. So basically, it's the non-tangible things on how our values, all of the best practices, how we do things in the company. It's also part of the enterprise architecture. So actually, EA, we can look at EA in two distinct ways. These are both like a side of EA. First, we can look at EA as a management program and also an analysis and design method. By the way, the book that I use here is the Holistic Enterprise Architecture, the fourth edition. So more information can be found there. So I'm just giving you an overview of the whole chapter, and I also use other references for this, other online references. Yeah. So going back, two ways that we can look at EA. Let's start with EA as a management program. When we look at EA as a management program, it can provide us with four things. First, strategic alignment. It connects goals, activities, and resources. Second, standardized policy. It provides us resource governance and implementation. It also provides us with decision support when it comes to financial control and configuration management. And lastly is resource oversight. So it's the life cycle approach to management, development or management. So as a management program, EA provides these four things, especially the resource oversight. As I mentioned, EA is used to see the company in a more strategic way. So it's in a management level. That's why it's good for us to look at it as a management program. Next, it could also be looked at as an analysis and design method. So that way, generally speaking, it provides us with four things as well. First is holistic approach. This means the framework analysis, design method, and artifact set. It also provides us with the current view or view as is. So strategies, processes, and resources. The future views. Views to be strategies, processes, and resources. And lastly, the management plan. A plan to move from the current to the future architecture. So we'll discuss that transition part in a bit. All right. So looking at EA as an analysis and design methodology, let's break it down into six elements. So it's already been mentioned in the previous slide, but just to break it down a bit, first we'll have the architecture framework, we'll have the architecture components, we have the current architecture, future architecture, the architecture transition roadmap, and the architecture threads. So let's break this down as well. So first, let's have this diagram. So as you can see here, um, on the left you have the current architecture, on the right you have the future architecture, and at the middle you have the transition roadmap. So for an enterprise architecture to be successful, first you have to see the current situation first. So unlike any um, problem solving process, you have to first see the problem. It means assessing the situation. So that's where the current architecture will come from. And then the future architecture. So from your assessment, what are the things that you want to improve within the company? What are the equipments that you want to add? Or what are the aspects of the business operations you want to streamline or to simplify? So that's where you'll see in the future architecture. But the transition between the current architecture to the future architecture is also a different matter. So that requires your architecture transition roadmap. So the transition is very crucial in any companies that's been going through this major change on the operation or the management level. So that's why everything has to be documented. So yeah. So here is an example. So one of the elements of EA as an analysis and design methodology is the framework. So I've also mentioned this a while ago. Um, Framework is the scope. So here's an example of a framework. It's EA6 Cube framework. So it's a type of framework that, of course, prioritizes strategic goals, the workflow, data flow, and systems. And what holds that together, of course, is the line of business and the services. So there are a number of frameworks that could work in different companies. So that's why there's such thing as enterprise architect, or this job could also be done by chief operating officer. So they could decide on what framework could work the best with the company situation. So yeah, that's the framework. Next is the architecture components. So in a framework, you have components. We have two types. We have the vertical and the horizontal components. So when we say vertical components, it's all the changeable goals, processes, systems that is serving a single business unit. It means, for example, um, the process of the human resource management part of the company, their data, their processes, and their systems are theirs alone. So all the components under that area is what you call vertical um, vertical components. On the other hand, horizontal components may serve. It's also pertains to goals, changeable goals, processes, and systems. But it serves different domains or different parts of the company. So it's more of the overall. So it serves the overall um, the several domains of the company. So yeah, or the business. Okay. So when we say current architecture, I've mentioned this earlier, the as is view. So it's important to, of course, before you can plan for the future, you have to understand what's going on in the present. So that's where current architecture will come from. So currently existing within the enterprise. So what's the current state of the operations of the different levels of the company, the business units? Are they conflicting when it comes to practices, when it comes to information systems, and other stuff? So yeah. And of course, from the current, we'll have the future. I've also mentioned this earlier. It means the modified version of the current architecture. So that is why um, it is important to be as comprehensive as possible. Anyway, EA is a comprehensive document, so it should be the current architecture should be as clear as possible so that the modification or the improvements that will be implemented in the future architecture will be clear and direct as well. So it the solutions in different problems could be like a technology solution, or it could be an operations level solution, management solution. So that's where you will see or you would see on the future architecture. And also, of course, the transition roadmap is very important. It's a live document. So it's a description of current and future views, sequencing plan for the transition. Yeah, as mentioned, it's a live document. So the document might would probably be updated every now and then depending on the process of the transition. But still, it's important to have a guide on in this process because it's very tedious and um, the journey of transition. I know many companies are going through transition, especially on the onset of the pandemic. So, um, most businesses had to reassess their operations if it's still effective. So, EA could really help with that process, and having that architecture transition roadmap would really help in making the transition easier. So, architecture threads. So I've been mentioning threads also earlier, but thread pertains to all common activities all throughout the EA. So wait, EA. Security pala yun. Okay, so next is the architecture thread. So I've also been mentioning threads earlier, but when we say threads or architecture thread, it means all the common activities within the enterprise architecture. So, like for example, we have three here. We have security, standards, and skills. So, for example, security, it's good for an EA to have a clear security management plan. So, security in all the domains. So, when it comes to the um, business aspect, when it comes to the technology aspect, so all data must be secured. There should also be like a focal person or a personnel that handles this standard. So security must be consistent in all the domains of the enterprise architecture. um, Also the standards, so all domains, all aspects of the enterprise architecture has domains. So when it comes to technology, we have industry standards, we have for the organization itself, we have the enterprise standards. So geographically speaking, we have the local standards, where the company is located, or we have the international standards or the global standards. So yeah. And lastly is the skill. This is one of the most important thing in EA, that should always be considered. So, skills pertains to persons. So, each personnel in the company has something to contribute. So, each domain has to have a group of person handling it. It's super. So, it's very important for us to recognize this and manage our human resources in enterprise architecture or in the company itself. And lastly, this is also important in enterprise architecture is what we call the repository. Since we're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of documents here, we have to have a repository. It could either be both local and global repository of all the databases of all the data, all the documents were, and this repository should be accessible to every stakeholder, to the employee, to the executives, to the managers, or also most importantly to the people who makes the decision within the company. So that's EA repository. So also an important factor is the communication. So when it comes to EA communication, the most important thing is that every stakeholder must be on the same page. So that's why it's actually the point of having enterprise architecture. So that everyone could have a better look of the company and everyone is on the same page when it comes to business operations, to the best practices, to the industry standards. So it's important for us after having that EA done by our enterprise architect or by the chief operating officer, we have to relay that information to our stakeholders. Of course, in keeping the company or to have a smoother transition into the future architecture, we have to have everyone on board with this vision. And that's why it's so important to communicate well with the stakeholders. When it comes to implementing enterprise architecture, expect that there would be resistance, and it's good that we communicate in a way that serves the interest of everyone, and of course especially the business itself. So that's it. That's it for my lesson. So just for my discussion, just to recap everything that we have discussed so far, we have EA. So EA is a noun and a verb. So EA is a document. It's an activity, and the way we make enterprise architecture is a verb. We document. We form databases, we install software, we implement changes. So it's an activity. It's a set of activity. So AI has four domains. So we have the business, the application, information, and technologies. EA has six elements. So we have governance, we have the framework. Governance, the overseeing. Framework is the scope. Methodologies is the step. Artifacts are all the things that we use within the EA, standards, and associated best practices. And EA is both a management program and an analysis and design methodologies. And also, EA is very important, especially the part where the company is transitioning from the current architecture and the future architecture. So, that is it for my discussion. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Beverly, no? Again, of course, as I mentioned earlier, no, in EA, no, projects, enterprise architect must select a framework and an implementation methodology. Although there are some EA frameworks which represent a method for implementing EA, they are either used in specific enterprises or incomplete actually application. The EA framework, as our presenter mentioned, it represents the structure to model enterprise business and IT. And the enterprise architecture framework, there are different models for various perspectives, each with different scope, no, and activities. There is no doubt that modeling the business and IT are not sufficient, no, for enterprise by their own. No, enterprise are looking to find a plan to address their challenges on competitiveness. So they utilize EA to provide appropriate solution for their business demands, and it needs to implement EA models. No, so the EA implementation methodology describes structures, no, methods in order to implement identified projects with EA projects. So moreover, it can comprise some distinct methods. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, no, Saxman's framework, or as the first EA framework, is limited to architecture and does not include a strategic planning methodology. So in 1992, Steve Spivak, no, introduced the Spivak presented the EA planning to complete EA life cycle. So in other words, EA methodology components EA framework. So EA contain, when we say EA enterprise architecture, it contains three principal phases, no? As is architecture, to be architecture, and migration plan. So in as is architecture, or also known as baseline, current, and initial architecture, EA will define current situation of business and IT of enterprise, no, by means of set of definitions which illustrate the current state of the enterprise mission, business processes, no, of course, technologies, infrastructure, because the key role of this stage is vision of the enterprise, no, the enterprise. So, and to be architecture, or also as desire, future, target architecture. So a while ago, our presenter mentioned about the future or target architecture. So the EA will actually will be represented the design architecture, including future and business IT, based on the vision of enterprise. Okay, this type of architecture is the result, no, of enterprise long-term strategies and plans. The key role of this stage is to identify appropriate information systems. Another is the EA migration plan, or also known as transition plan. It is essential strategy that will employ for transition that from the as is to the to be one. So the key role of this stage is to use the proper, or using the proper implementation method. So
The enterprise architecture methodology support advanced development techniques and technologies. So it covers all aspects of EA life cycle, that the planning of enterprise understanding projects, the analysis of business requirements, the designs of the systems, the evolution of systems, no, and the ongoing enhancement of all of what I mentioned earlier. So the methodology is both complete and concise, serving as a coherent guide for practitioner professionals. No, it allows paths and pieces of content to be selected and extracted for application on a specific project. So, well-implemented EA helps a company innovate and change by providing both stability and flexibility. Today's here there are some several EA methods which they are introduced to provide a plan for developing tailored information system. Again, this information system must address existing enterprise challenges and update business structure of enterprise by information system integrity. And EA implementing, of course, again, a method that can be independent or dependent to a framework. So while EA framework tries to capture information, that enterprise framework tries to capture information from enterprise business and IT and model them. So EA method tries to utilize models for developing appropriate IS and IT infrastructure for enterprise. No? So we have the enterprise architecture planning, no, which was introduced actually in 1992. No, we have actually the main idea of this one is it specified the plan for subsequent design and implementation of EA. So the Saxman framework, no, prepares the broad description for architectural layers, while EAP concentrates on what do you call this one? Developing and managing the process for making alignment between business and IT. Moreover, EAP is a planning that concentrates on the developing of matrices, no, for comparison and analysis data. So IS in infrastructure, significant part of EAP is the implementation. Okay, so in the implementation or in the EAP, it provides the process of using architecture for the utilizing information system in order to support business and the plan in order to implement structures or architectures. It comprises actually with initiation planning, preliminary business model, enterprise survey, current system and technology architecture, data architecture, application architecture, technology architecture, implementation plan, planning conclusion, and transitions to implementation. Now, another of course is the TUGAP. No? Actually, meron nga po tayong exams, no, for TUGAP, no. TUGAP architecture development method, no. It provides a tested and iterative process for developing the EA, no, or the enterprise architecture. So it comprises instituting an architectural framework, transitioning, developing architecture contents, and governing the comprehension of architecture. So mentioned activities are fulfilled by employing an iterative cycle of continuous architecture description and comprehensions that permits enterprise to transform themselves in a managed manner in accordance with business targets. So TUGAP is a methodology that describes an iterative method, no, for EA development. So enterprise architect must be determined some features of TUGAP, no, methodologies such as level of details, breadth of coverage, and extent of time horizon due to ADM does not provide prescription on those. No? So the ADM phases are preliminary, the ADM cycle, no, requirement management. No? So TUGAP specifies a technical reference model or the TRM, no, for enterprise continuum. So TUGAP supports evaluation of EA by way of EC as its application based or knowledge based actually. No? So I think that's it for for our introduction. But I just want also to inform everyone that we had what we call performance RM, no? Business, service components, technical, data, and others, no? So most commonly, the concept actually of the two gap, no, and other framework or methodology, it based on the proposed framework. We carry out comparison of three aspects, no, concepts, modeling, of course, and process. So although some EAMs like such as TUGAP have a highest grade in all mentioned aspects, they are all still need to decrease complexity of process, no, and modeling. Moreover, lack of considerations on maintenance requirements and continual process are notable items which need to consider. Although all existing EAMs and most popular EA projects, no, and some other aspect are inspired from them. So we will continue this research, of course, to in future by providing holistic comparison framework and selecting more no. The aim of this discussion, of course, is that those who are looking for find appropriate, no, for this project by provided information. So I think that's it for this topic.